For 3 months, she hasn't missed a single morning. Not one. Same tree, same time, same impossible hope. Every dawn in the quiet town of Willow Creek, Ohio, a black cat named Shadow slips out of her owner's backyard at precisely 5:47 a.m. and darts a mile across town to Willow Creek Park. Rain pelts her sleek fur, frost stings her delicate paws. Weekday or weekend, she doesn't pause to chase sparrows, dodge cars, or linger at street corners. She heads straight to a young oak tree, its polished brass plaque reading Ethan James Carter, beloved son, forever 12. And she paws at the soil, not aimlessly, not playfully, but with purpose, with grief, with a desperation that seems to carry a message no human can yet decipher. At first, it was just Shadow. One cat, scratching obsessively at the roots of a memorial tree, as if she could claw her way to the boy it honored. But now, there are 15 of them. 15 cats, tabby, Siamese, a scruffy stray with a torn ear, a sleek Persian from the wealthy side of town, even a Maine Coon whose owner swore it never left the house, all gathering at dawn like it's a sacred ritual. Their paws tear at the same patch of earth, their eyes fixed on the tree as if they know something the town doesn't. And maybe they do. Have you ever seen a cat mourn? You will. This story isn't just about a boy who vanished. It's about a cat who never gave up, a secret never meant to be unearthed, and a town forced to confront what it buried beneath layers of denial. 6 months earlier, Ethan James Carter had been declared lost in a tragic hiking accident on Pine Hollow Trail, a winding path through dense woods where kids explored every summer, where no one ever thought to fear. His body was never found. There were tears, potlucks, a memorial ceremony where the town gathered to plant a sapling in his name. His parents, Michael and Sarah Carter, placed Ethan's favorite sketchbook, a die-cast toy car, and a woven keychain with his initials, ETH, inside a stainless steel time capsule buried beneath the oak. Shadow, Ethan's companion since his 9th birthday, had to be restrained during the ceremony. She yowled for hours after the crowd dispersed, a sound so piercing that neighbors, sipping coffee on their porches, swore it wasn't feline, it was human, raw, and heartbroken. 3 months later, the soil around the tree was disturbed again, this time by a cat's relentless claws. Michael Carter, a former Marine turned auto mechanic, hadn't touched a wrench since the accident. He roamed their small, cluttered house on Maple Street, living on energy drinks and guilt, his calloused hands idle but his mind racing with memories of Ethan's laugh, his quick sketches of birds, his habit of sneaking extra cookies. Sarah, a librarian at Willow Creek Elementary, returned to work after 2 weeks, though her storytime sessions were often cut short by sudden tears or a need to step into the library's back room to compose herself. The only thing that hadn't stopped moving was Shadow. She's grieving, the vet, Dr. Karen Tran, had said during a house call, adjusting her glasses as she examined the cat. Cats can mirror trauma, especially when they're bonded to someone. She just needs time. But this wasn't grief. This was obsession. Each morning at 5:47 a.m., Shadow would slip through a cracked window, no matter how tightly Michael sealed it or how many locks he added to the back door. She'd sprint through Willow Creek's quiet streets, past the diner with its flickering neon sign, past the old gas station, past the school where Ethan used to ride his bike, and arrive at the park, at the oak tree with its plaque glinting in the dawn light. She'd paw at the soil until someone, usually Michael, sometimes a jogger or dog walker, dragged her home, her small body wriggling in protest. By the 3rd week, she was joined by a tabby named Rusty, owned by the Petersons, who'd lost their own son to a supposed drowning in Green River years earlier. Then came a Siamese from the miller's house, a stray with a limp from 2 blocks away, a fluffy Persian belonging to Mayor Helen Grant, and even a massive Maine Coon whose owner, Mrs. Langley, swore it had never left her porch before. 15 cats, all focused on Ethan's tree, their silent digging a strange, synchronized act that sent chills down the spines of early morning joggers. Groundskeeper Tom Ellis, a grizzled man with a limp from a high school football injury, had had enough. "I want them gone," he told Sheriff Laura Hayes, slamming his toolbox shut in the park's maintenance shed. His face was flushed, his voice rough with frustration. "This ain't right, Laura. I keep filling the same damn hole every evening, smoothing it out, tamping it down. Next morning, it's back, deeper than before, like they're trying to tunnel to China." Sheriff Hayes, a woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, stood by the park's iron fence, her hands on her hips as she watched the cats work in eerie unison. "Look at them," Tom muttered, wiping sweat from his brow despite the morning chill. "No meowing, no hissing, no fighting over territory, just working, like they know what's down there." Hayes didn't answer immediately. She just stared at Shadow, the black cat who paused her digging, looked up, and locked eyes with her. Those green eyes held no fear, no aggression, just a question: "Why aren't you listening?" Hayes had seen a lot in her 15 years as sheriff: bar fights, petty thefts, even a missing hiker or two, but nothing like this. She adjusted her hat and muttered, "I don't know what's going on, Tom, but I'm not ignoring it. Not anymore." Sarah tried explaining it to her book club, a group of 6 women who met weekly in the library's cozy reading room, surrounded by shelves of worn paperbacks. "She still waits by his window," she said, her voice trembling as she clutched a mug of chamomile tea, the steam rising in thin wisps. "Like she expects his laugh, his footsteps, the way he'd call her name when he got home from school." She didn't mention that Shadow had stopped eating her kibble, surviving on scraps of tuna Sarah left out in desperation, or that the cat had taken to sleeping in Ethan's old denim jacket, curled around his lingering scent as if it were a lifeline. She didn't mention what their neighbor, 70-year-old Clara Brooks, had whispered through the backyard fence the day before, her voice low and urgent: "That day on the trail, Sarah, Shadow broke her leash." She didn't run toward the search party or the ravine where they were looking. She bolted the other way, toward the old ranger station, like she was chasing something. Sarah's voice trembled as she recounted it to Michael later that night, sitting at their kitchen table under a flickering fluorescent light. But the witness, Ryan Holt, said he saw Ethan fall into the ravine. Clara had nodded slowly, her eyes sharp despite her age. "He pointed there, got everyone looking that way, volunteers, dogs, the whole search party. But your cat, Sarah, she wasn't fooled. The accident had been quick, or so it seemed." Ryan Holt, a newcomer to Willow Creek who'd arrived just 3 months before Ethan's disappearance, claimed he'd been hiking alone when he saw Ethan slip off a cliff's edge on Pine Hollow Trail. His shouts triggered a massive search, volunteers combing the woods, search and rescue dogs barking through the night, drones buzzing overhead, but no body surfaced. "The ravine feeds into the Green River," Dr. Paul Grayson, the town's only doctor and a respected figure, had said at a packed community meeting in the town hall. "Currents are strong this time of year. They can carry a body miles away." He signed Ethan's death certificate without a body, citing Holt's testimony and the lack of evidence suggesting anything else. The town mourned. The Carters buried the time capsule under the oak. Life moved on, or tried to. But now, 6 months later, whispers grew in Willow Creek's diners, churches, and corner stores: Ethan didn't fall. Maybe he was taken. And maybe Shadow, a cat who'd once been just a pet, knew it all along. Michael sat on the porch that night, the air heavy with the scent of impending rain, watching Shadow claw at the screen door in frustration, her green eyes glinting in the moonlight. "I've locked her in every closet, every shed, even the garage," he told Sheriff Hayes, who'd stopped by unannounced with a thermos of coffee, her patrol car parked crooked. "She gets out. Every time." Hayes sipped her coffee, her face unreadable in the dim porch light. "I think it's time we dig up that capsule," she said softly, setting her thermos on the step. Michael flinched, his hands tightening around his mug. It's just his things, his sketchbook, his car, his keychain. Hayes met his eyes, her voice steady but heavy. "You said that, Michael. But if we open it together, if the whole sees what's inside, or what isn't, maybe we stop wondering if these cats are crazy." Michael's throat tightened, his voice barely above a whisper. And if it's empty? Hayes looked out into the dark, where Shadow sat at attention, eyes fixed on the horizon like a sentinel. Then we're not digging up a capsule, Michael. We're digging up the truth. No one spoke on the way to Willow Creek Park. Sheriff Hayes drove her squad car slowly through the early morning fog, headlights off to avoid drawing attention in the pre-dawn quiet. In the back seat, Michael sat stone-faced, Shadow purring softly in his lap, her warmth a small anchor against his dread. Sarah rode in a separate vehicle with 2 deputies, clutching her brother David's hand. David, a burly man who ran the town's hardware store, had insisted she come. "If it's empty, Sarah, we need to be there to see it," he'd said when she hesitated. "We need to know." By the time they arrived, a dozen townsfolk had gathered beyond the yellow caution tape, bundled in coats and scarves, clutching coffee mugs or each other's hands. Word had spread fast in Willow Creek, secrets don't stay buried long, especially not when 15 cats are digging them up. The sky was low and gray, the kind that steals the shine from everything. The time capsule lay just beneath the oak's roots, where it had been placed 6 months ago under a plaque reading Ethan James Carter, Forever 12. Sheriff Hayes nodded to the grounds crew, no machinery, just shovels. They'd agreed this had to be done by hand, out of respect for the boy and the family. The crowd hushed as the first clods of earth came up, the sound of metal on dirt echoing in the still air. No one moved. Even the birds seemed to fall silent. Shadow sat quietly beside Michael, her tail still, her green eyes locked on the hole like she was waiting for a signal only she could hear. After 40 minutes of careful digging, the capsule's edge appeared, mud-streaked, weather-worn, but intact. Dr. Ellen Price, a forensic specialist from the Ohio State Police, stepped forward with a clipboard and a pair of nitrile gloves. Her face was calm but her eyes were sharp, taking in every detail of the scene. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter," she said gently, her voice cutting through the heavy silence, "I need your permission before we open it." Michael didn't hesitate. "Do it." Sarah nodded, her hands trembling as she gripped David's arm. Price turned the latches with quiet clicks, each one sounding like a gunshot in the stillness. The lid creaked open. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that seemed to pull the oxygen from the park. It was empty. No sketchbook, no die-cast car, no woven keychain with ETH in faded beads. Just clean, bare metal, untouched, undisturbed, as if nothing had ever been placed inside. Sarah swayed on her feet, David caught her before she collapsed, his own face pale. Sheriff Hayes' jaw clenched, her hand hovering over her radio. Before she could speak, Shadow lunged forward, slipping from Michael's grip with a fluid grace. Everyone braced, expecting her to leap into the capsule, but she didn't. Instead, she circled it, sniffed its edges, and let out a single, piercing yowl that rolled across the park like a warning siren. A sound that didn't ask for permission. A sound that demanded, "Now do you believe me?" The townsfolk stood frozen, their whispers starting to build like a low hum. Clara Brooks, the elderly neighbor, clutched her shawl and muttered, "I told you that cat knew something." Mayor Grant, standing nearby with her Persian cat in a carrier, shook her head. "This is unnatural." But Michael wasn't listening to them. He was staring at the empty capsule, his mind racing back to the day of the memorial, when they'd placed Ethan's things inside, or thought they had. He turned to Hayes. "Who closed it?" Hayes met his gaze. "Grayson. He said he'd handle it, to spare you the pain." Sarah's voice broke. "You're saying he lied?" Price stepped in, her tone measured. "We're saying we need to investigate. This capsule was tampered with." Back at the sheriff's office, everything changed. The small, cluttered room buzzed with tension as Hayes paced in front of a topographic map of Pine Hollow Trail pinned to the wall. "This isn't an accident," she said, her voice sharp. "This is a missing person case, possibly an abduction, possibly staged." Deputy Alex Carter, no relation to Michael, sat at the table, staring at the open file folder, his young face pale with disbelief. But Ryan Holt saw him fall into the ravine. "No," Hayes said firmly, her voice like steel. "Holt said he saw him fall." "Big difference." Dr. Price leaned over the table, flipping through Ethan's case file with quick, precise movements. "No body, no trace, and a death certificate signed by Dr. Grayson without physical evidence. That's sloppy at best. At worst, it's deliberate." Michael stood in the doorway, still covered in park dirt, his arms crossed tightly across his chest. "You think the doctor's involved?" His voice was low, almost a growl. Price shrugged, her expression guarded but her eyes intense. "It's too early to say, but someone tampered with that capsule. We'll have the coroner test the interior for trace DNA, but my guess is those items, Ethan's sketchbook, car, keychain, were never placed inside at all." Sarah entered the room, her face ashen, holding Ethan's favorite baseball cap, faded blue with a Cleveland Guardians logo. "Shadow brought this to me last night," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was under his bed." She pulled 5 threads from it and buried each one in a different spot around the yard. Hayes frowned, leaning forward, her elbows on the table. "Why 5? "No idea," Sarah replied, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "But it wasn't random. She knew exactly what she was doing." Price stood, tucking her clipboard under her arm. "I want to dig up those spots today. All of them." Michael nodded, his voice rough. "I'll show you where." That afternoon, under a brooding gray sky, they followed Shadow's buried threads in the Carter's backyard, a patchwork of grass, flower beds, and a small vegetable garden Ethan had helped plant. The air smelled of wet earth and impending rain. At the third spot, beneath a thorny rosebush Sarah had tended meticulously, Michael's shovel struck something hard. He knelt, brushing away dirt, and pulled out a soaked but legible receipt from a convenience store 50 miles away in Ashton, timestamped just hours after Ethan vanished. The name on the card, Ryan Holt. Hayes' eyes narrowed as she took the receipt in a gloved hand. Why was he there so soon? Michael's voice was slow, deliberate, as if each word was a stone he was placing carefully. He was supposed to be at the trail when Ethan went missing. He shouted to the search party, got everyone looking at the ravine. Price's tone was grim, her pen tapping her clipboard. Maybe that's exactly what he wanted, to keep everyone distracted while someone else moved Ethan. That night, Sheriff Hayes sat at her desk in the dimly lit office, the hum of the heater the only sound besides the scratch of her pen. She studied Holt's lease agreement for his Willow Creek apartment, obtained from the landlord earlier that day. The Social Security number listed belonged to a man who died in 1995. Fake identity, fake witness. She picked up her phone, her voice clipped as she spoke to her team. "We're reopening this case officially. I want every piece of evidence Ryan Holt touched tested, trailhead, picnic area, ranger station, and that old cabin Shadow led us to." Michael, who'd stayed late to help sort files, looked up from a stack of witness statements. "What cabin?" "The one Shadow took us to this afternoon," Price replied, pinning a grainy photo to the corkboard, a dilapidated structure off Pine Hollow Trail, its roof sagging, its windows boarded. "It's been abandoned for years. I checked it out. The floorboards had been pried up. Under a rug, we found this." She placed a Ziploc bag on the table. Inside was Ethan's woven keychain, the one Sarah had made for his 10th birthday, its beads spelling ETH in faded colors. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, tears spilling over. "That's his. How did it end up in a cabin 50 miles away?" Hayes' voice was soft but firm, her eyes steady. "That's what we're going to find out." By the following morning, the FBI had joined the investigation, their black SUVs rolling into Willow Creek's quiet streets like an invasion. Holt, likely not his real name, had vanished 2 weeks after Ethan's memorial. No forwarding address, paid in cash, no digital footprint. Price combed through security footage from nearby towns, her laptop screen glowing in the sheriff's office. At a gas station near a shuttered church in Mapleton, an elderly woman's dashcam had captured a van with Indiana plates, time-stamped 3 days after Ethan's disappearance, heading north toward the Canadian border. The driver's face was blurry, but the van's license plate was clear. "We're running it now," Price said, her fingers flying over the keyboard. Meanwhile, Shadow's behavior shifted. She stopped visiting the oak tree, instead embarking on new routes each morning, sniffing along playgrounds, school fences, the ice cream shop on Main Street where Ethan used to beg for double scoops of mint chocolate chip. She moved with purpose, her tail low, her ears alert. "She's tracking a fresh scent," Dr. Lisa Tran, a feline behavior specialist brought in by the FBI, explained to the Carters in their living room. "Cats have scent memories that can last years. What she's doing isn't random, she's building a map." Michael followed Shadow daily now, a leash in one hand, a notebook in the other, jotting down every stop, every turn, every pause. Hope can look a lot like madness, but sometimes it's both. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet, Shadow stopped at the edge of a field behind Willow Creek High School. Her tail went stiff, her body crouched low, and she let out a soft, guttural hiss. Michael followed her gaze to a narrow trail half covered in fallen leaves, leading to an old grain silo, abandoned for a decade. Its rusted frame loomed like a forgotten giant, vines choking its base, graffiti scrawled across its curved walls. To a kid, it might have seemed like a secret fort. To Michael, standing with Shadow at the edge of the clearing, it looked like a crime scene no one had found, until now. "Used to be county property," he muttered to Price, who joined him after he radioed her from the trail. "Shut down when they built the new water plant." Price scanned the broken windows with practiced eyes, her hand resting on her holster. Shadow tugged at her leash, nose low, posture alert. She wasn't searching, she was tracking. "Let her lead," Price said, stepping aside. Michael unclipped the leash. Shadow moved fast but focused, darting straight for a squat utility shed beside the silo, its door secured with a heavy padlock, thick undergrowth around its base. She scratched at the door, then froze, sniffing the ground. Michael leaned in, his heart pounding. "She's found something." There were footprints in the mud, fresh, crisp, and deep, from heavy work boots. Price's voice sharpened. "Somebody's been here recently." She stepped back, radioing Hayes. "Sheriff, it's Price. We've got probable cause at the old silo. Unknown suspects may be active. Need backup ASAP." She drew her weapon, her movements precise. They moved incautiously, the way people do when they sense something terrible waits behind a door. Michael grabbed a rusted crowbar leaning against the silo's fence. Price gave him a quick look, her eyes narrowing. "Let me lead." He nodded but kept the crowbar tight in his grip. 3 sharp strikes, and the padlock gave way with a groan. The door creaked open. The smell hit them first, damp earth, stale cigarette smoke, mold, and something sterile, like bleach trying to mask decay. The shed was small, maybe 12 feet across, empty except for a single metal chair, a table with a battery-powered flashlight, and several cardboard boxes lining the wall, each labeled with dates and cryptic codes written in black marker. The floor was uneven, a faded tarp in the center. Shadow charged to it, clawing it aside with furious swipes to reveal a set of loose floorboards. Price covered the room, her gun steady, as Michael knelt and lifted a board. His breath caught. A small Ziploc bag lay beneath, containing Ethan's woven keychain, its beads spelling ETH in faded colors. Michael staggered back, his knees weak. That was supposed to be in his capsule. Price's voice was grim, her eyes scanning the room. "Not anymore." She turned to her radio. "Hayes, we have evidence of movement." Possible trafficking site. Repeat, this is real. 2 hours later, the clearing buzzed with law enforcement. Sheriff Hayes arrived with tactical support, the FBI following with forensic vans to rope off the scene like a battlefield. The boxes inside the shed were opened and catalogued under harsh floodlights. Inside were children's belongings, school IDs, stuffed animals, a single sneaker, a friendship bracelet, each tagged with names, dates, and origins. It wasn't just Ethan. There were dozens of names, most already on missing persons registries, some presumed dead from accidents like drownings, falls, or lost hikers. "This is a trophy room," an FBI agent named Torres muttered, his voice thick with disgust as he held up a bag containing a pink shoelace marked Pine NC, June 22. "They're cataloging them like inventory." Michael stood silent, staring at the shoelace, his vision blurring as he thought of Ethan, his crooked smile, his love of drawing birds, his habit of leaving his shoes untied. They brought Sarah to the sheriff's office that night. She sat across from Hayes and Price in a small conference room with beige walls and flickering fluorescent lights, the air heavy with the scent of stale coffee. Michael held her hand, his thumb rubbing circles on her palm. Shadow curled at their feet, her green eyes watchful, her tail flicking occasionally. Price spread out the evidence across the table, photos, labels, handwritten logs. Then she placed a file in front of them labeled Carter E. Inside were surveillance images of Ethan, some old, taken without consent in Willow Creek, showing him riding his bike, walking to school, tossing a stick for Shadow. Others were new, Ethan with short-cropped hair, standing in a backyard by a red barn with peeling paint, time-stamped 3 weeks ago. Sarah gasped, her hand trembling as she touched the photo. "That's him." Michael's voice cracked, barely audible. "He's alive." Hayes leaned forward, her voice steady but urgent. "We think he's being moved again. These logs show transfers every 3 to 4 months. Look here." She pointed to a line highlighted in yellow, October 15, transfer complete, Ashton property. Price checked her watch, her face tense. "That's today." An FBI field unit mobilized within the hour. Data from the logs pointed to 3 potential properties across state lines, all rural. 1, a former dairy farm in northern Indiana, matched recent activity linked to a shell company used in other child trafficking cases. Michael gripped Shadow's harness in the back seat of the FBI command vehicle, his jaw set. "I'm going with you," he told Agent Torres, a stern woman with a tight bun and a no-nonsense attitude. "No civilians," Torres began, but Price cut her off, her voice firm. "He's not just a father, Torres. He's got Shadow. That cat found what no radar, drone, or tech ever did. We bring him." Torres hesitated, her eyes flicking to Shadow, who sat alert in Michael's lap. "Once the perimeter is secure, he and the cat can enter with a handler. But only then." Shadow let out a low, eager meow, as if she understood. The sun was rising as they reached the Ashton property, an old farm, isolated, surrounded by dense forest and cornfields, barely visible from the county road. FBI tactical teams fanned out, moving like shadows through the morning mist, their boots silent on the damp grass. Through binoculars, Michael saw movement in the farmhouse windows, small figures, quick and cautious, darting out of sight. A cat's meow echoed from inside, sharp and urgent. A van was parked near a barn, its tires caked with fresh mud, suggesting recent movement. Hayes' voice crackled through the radio. "Thermal shows 8 kids inside, several adults. We've got them." The command came again, all units in position. "Execute on my mark. 3, 2, 1, go." Black-clad agents swarmed the house, their shouts cutting through the dawn. Doors crashed open. Orders echoed. Michael held Shadow's harness tight, his heart pounding in his chest. Then came the call, children secured. First floor clear. Moving up now. Price turned to Michael, her eyes steady. Go. Michael didn't run, Shadow did. Her leash slipped from his hand as she bolted across the field, her black fur a streak against the gray dawn. Michael followed, his boots sinking into the muddy ground, as they crossed the threshold of the old farmhouse. Inside, it was chaos under control, agents moving children to safety, wrapping them in blankets, their faces blank with shock. An agent was identifying each child, checking names against a tablet. But Shadow didn't pause. She darted down a hallway, her tail stiff, her nose pressed to the worn wooden floor. At the end, a door stood ajar, light spilling from within. Shadow pushed through, her body low. Michael stepped inside, and the world stopped. There, curled on a small cot under a slanted attic roof, was a thin boy with chopped brown hair and frightened eyes too big for his pale face. He looked up, his lips trembling, and in a voice that cracked like breaking glass, he said, "Dad." Michael's arms opened, his crowbar clattering to the floor. Ethan launched himself into them, his small frame shaking with sobs. Shadow let out a sharp, joyous meow, circling them both, her tail brushing Ethan's leg. "I knew you'd come," Ethan whispered into his father's shirt, his voice muffled. "I told Shadow every night where I was, the red barn, the gravel road, the tree with the crooked branch. I told her in my mind. I knew she'd hear me." Michael's face crumpled, tears streaking his dirt-smudged cheeks. "We heard you, son. We heard you." Ethan wouldn't let go of Shadow as FBI agents moved quietly around the attic room, photographing the scene, bagging evidence. Dust particles danced in the early morning light filtering through a cracked window with green shutters. Downstairs, the farmhouse buzzed with controlled chaos, medical personnel triaging the rescued children, agents logging evidence, officers securing suspects in plastic cuffs. But here, in this small attic, time had stopped. "Dad," Ethan whispered, his eyes searching Michael's, wide and uncertain. "Is this real, or is it another trick?" Michael swallowed the lump in his throat, his voice hoarse. "We're really here, son. Me, Mom, Shadow. We're taking you home." Ethan pressed his forehead to Shadow's, his voice barely audible. "I knew you'd come. I told you everything in my head, every night, the barn, the road, the smells." Shadow purred, her green eyes half closed, as if acknowledging his words. They didn't wait. A medical transport was staged on the property for the children, its red lights flashing silently in the dawn. Ethan rode with 2 paramedics to the Indianapolis Children's Trauma Center, while Shadow was rushed separately to the attached veterinary emergency wing. Her paws were raw, bleeding from months of relentless digging, her body bruised from squeezing through tight spaces to escape the house daily. In the ER hallway, Sarah met them, sprinting down the corridor with tears streaming, nearly collapsing when she saw Ethan in Michael's arms. "Mom," Ethan said, his voice small but clear, like a bell ringing through fog. She kissed his forehead, again and again, her hands trembling. "We missed you, baby. Oh, God, we missed you so much." Behind them, nurses swarmed Shadow's stretcher, wheeling her toward surgery. Ethan broke away, panic flashing in his eyes. "Wait, where are they taking her?" Michael crouched beside him, his voice steady despite his own tears. "She's hurt, sweetheart. She fought hard to find you. They're going to fix her." "No," Ethan sobbed, his voice breaking. "She just found me. Don't let her die." Inside the operating suite, Dr. Anna Lee, a veterinary surgeon with steady hands and a calm demeanor, reviewed Shadow scans, internal bruising, torn paw pads, a fractured rib, and signs of dehydration. "We've got minutes, maybe," she told her team, her voice clipped as she pulled on gloves. "Start fluids. Prep for wound repair and rib stabilization. Get that heart monitor on." Shadow's vitals flickered weakly on the screen, her gums pale, her breathing uneven. Back in the children's wing, a nurse with kind eyes handed Ethan a stethoscope and placed the earpieces in his ears. "Shadow knows your heartbeat," she explained softly. "It's how cats remember safety, sound, smell, rhythm. We're going to record it for her." Ethan pressed his lips to a small recorder, his voice trembling but clear. "It's me, Shadow. I'm safe. You found me like I knew you would. I'm here, and now it's your turn to come back. Please. I need you." In the conference room across the hospital, Sheriff Hayes, Dr. Price, and 2 FBI agents pored over a pile of documents seized from the farmhouse and the silo shed. "It's worse than we thought," Price said, laying out files like evidence at a trial, her hands steady but her eyes burning with intensity. "There's a coded ledger, dates, locations, initials that match kids in their trophy archive." Hayes pointed to a familiar name, Carter E. They moved him between 3 states, Ohio, Michigan, Indiana. Always rural areas, always under shell companies disguised as foster care agencies. An agent placed a bag on the table containing Ethan's woven keychain, a tiny camera lens embedded in one of the beads. "They recorded him," Price explained, her voice tight. "Likely sent footage to buyers to prove custody." Michael, standing in the doorway with a coffee gone cold, stepped forward, his voice low. "What about Dr. Grayson?" Price's jaw tightened. His medical credentials let them sign fake death certificates. He filed at least 7, including Ethan's. His journal names their recruiter, Ryan Holt. But Holt was just a field operator. There's someone higher up, someone regional. The investigation deepened over the next days. Price and her team traced the van's plates to a shell company in Indianapolis, uncovering a network of properties used as holding sites. The red barn from Ethan's photo was identified as a hub, a waypoint for children before they were moved across state lines or out of the country. The FBI found encrypted emails on a seized laptop, hinting at a buyer list, but cracking the code would take weeks. Meanwhile, Shadow's behavior had changed after her surgery. She no longer went to the oak tree, instead spending her days at Ethan's side, her limping gait a reminder of her ordeal. Ethan, now in therapy at the trauma center, began to open up, telling his counselor about the places he'd been held, a barn with a leaky roof, a cabin with a dirt floor, a house with green shutters. "I'd talk to Shadow in my head," he said in one session, his voice soft. "I'd describe the smells, hay, motor oil, pine. I knew she'd find me." 3 nights after the rescue, Ethan woke screaming from a nightmare, his cries echoing down the hospital hall. Michael rushed in, heart pounding, but Shadow was already there, curled against Ethan's chest, purring softly, her nose buried under his chin. Ethan's sobs slowed, his breathing evened. When he looked up at his father, his voice was a whisper. "She came first." Michael sat on the bed's edge, blinking back tears. "You're safe, son. You're home." By morning, Ethan was sketching again, sitting in a hospital chair with Shadow beside him. He drew a picture of the oak tree, Shadow at its roots, her green eyes vivid on the page. "The moral of the story," he told her, closing his sketchbook, "is that sometimes your hero doesn't talk at all." Shadow purred, her tail flicking lazily. Sarah brought pancakes, her smile fragile but warm. "She gets story time and extra treats." "She deserves it," Ethan said proudly. "She saved me." The investigation pressed on relentlessly. At the FBI's Indianapolis field office, Price stood before a corkboard covered in red string, photos, and copies of Grayson's journal. "We've identified 3 more shell companies," she told the task force, her voice steady despite the late hour. "All tied to rural properties used for holding kids, 2 in Indiana, 1 in Pennsylvania. But here's the breakthrough." She pointed to a photo of the red barn. This was their hub. Every rotation of children passed through it, the last stop before the border. An agent asked, "Where's the buyer list?" Price frowned, her fingers tapping her laptop. Encrypted. We're close to cracking it. But thanks to Shadow, we've got fingerprints, DNA, and survivor testimony. She projected a still from Ethan's keychain camera, a shaky view of a kitchen, a man's voice, a door locking. This was uploaded to a private server. We've traced the IP to a server in Chicago. Weeks later, the story broke nationwide. News trucks lined the hospital sidewalk, reporters clamoring for interviews with Hayes, Price, and Dr. Lee. But the Carters stayed quiet, focused on Ethan and Shadow. In Willow Creek, yellow ribbons appeared on trees, fluttering in the breeze. Churches rang their bells. Even Tom Ellis, the gruff groundskeeper, admitted over coffee at the diner, maybe that cat knew more than all of us. By the end of the month, 17 children were rescued in coordinated raids across the Midwest, all tied to accidents where cats had tried to warn someone, a scratching at a memorial, a yowl at a trailhead. Most were ignored, except Shadow. Summer arrived, warm and golden. Shadow chased butterflies in the Carters' backyard, carried twigs in her mouth, played with a vigor that hit her limp. One night, under a blanket of stars, Ethan sat on the grass with her, whispering, "I know you can't stay forever, but I'm safe with you." Shadow purred, her head in his lap. Some stories end in darkness. This one ends in yellow sunlight, in a boy who survived, and a cat who never gave up. Because sometimes, it's not logic or law that saves us. It's loyalty, pure, simple, and unspoken. Shadow didn't understand case files, state lines, or shell companies, but she knew one thing: Ethan was out there, and she would find him.